June 15, 1943, Camp Clarinda, Iowa. Obergfreiter Klaus Hartmann stepped off the transport train into blinding Midwestern sunlight. The 22-year-old veteran of the Afrika Korps had surrendered at Tunisia 2 months earlier, expecting transfer to a British camp. Instead, he found himself in the American heartland, surrounded by cornfields stretching to the horizon. What none of the 378,000 German prisoners who would pass through American camps knew was that their captivity would shatter every assumption they held about American industrial capability, military strength, and the ultimate outcome of the war. They had been told Germany was winning. The German prisoners arriving in America between 1943 and 1945 had been conditioned by years of Nazi propaganda. Minister of Propaganda Joseph Goebbels had built an entire narrative around American weakness. The Americans were portrayed as soft, decadent, incapable of sustained industrial effort. Their army was depicted as poorly trained, their equipment inferior, their society too diverse and individualistic to wage total war effectively. The Luftwaffe pilots, who had bombed British cities, were told American aircraft production figures were propaganda lies. The panzer crews, who had fought across North Africa, believed German engineering supremacy was absolute. The U-boat sailors, who hunted convoys in the Atlantic, assumed American shipbuilding could never replace losses. They were about to discover how catastrophically wrong their intelligence had been. Hartmann had been a loader in a Panzer IV crew with the 21st Panzer Division. He had fought at Gazala, at Tobruk, in the final desperate battles around Tunis. He had seen American Sherman tanks in combat and considered them adequate but inferior to German designs. Thinner armor, inferior optics, less powerful guns. His commander had told him one Tiger tank was worth 10 Shermans, and Hartmann had believed it. The mathematics seemed simple. German quality would overcome American quantity. Standing in Camp Clarinda's processing center, Hartmann received his first shock. The camp itself was constructed with precision that rivaled German military standards. Barracks built to exact specifications, plumbing that worked perfectly, electrical systems installed throughout. But what struck him most was the casual abundance. The American guards wore uniforms that looked new, carried equipment that showed no signs of shortage or improvisation. Their boots were leather, not the ersatz materials German soldiers had worn since 1942. Their weapons were clean, well-maintained, standardized. Lieutenant Werner Schmidt had commanded a company in the 16th Infantry Division, captured in Tunisia. An educated officer who spoke some English, Schmidt became the senior German officer at Camp Clarinda. In his first meeting with the American camp commander, Colonel Robert Harrison, Schmidt attempted to establish the formal protocols he expected. Harrison's office provided Schmidt's second revelation about America. The colonel sat at a solid oak desk, with a telephone that connected to anywhere in the United States. A secretary typed on an electric typewriter. File cabinets held organized records for every prisoner. The room was heated in winter, cooled by fans in summer. Everything worked. Everything was maintained. There were no shortages, no improvisation, no make-do solutions. Harrison explained the Geneva Convention requirements matter-of-factly, then added something that stunned Schmidt. "You'll be working, Lieutenant. Every able-bodied prisoner works. You'll be paid 80 cents per day in camp scrip. You can buy cigarettes, toiletries, writing materials. You'll eat the same rations as American troops." Schmidt did the calculation. 80 cents daily, $24 monthly. In camp scrip, certainly, but still payment. German prisoners in Russian camps received nothing but starvation rations. The food was the third shock, and perhaps the most psychologically devastating. Feldwebel Johann Krebs had been captured in Sicily. After 2 years of combat, he had experienced the increasing food shortages in Germany since 1941. Ersatz coffee, reduced bread rations, meat once weekly if lucky. The Wehrmacht had maintained better supplies than civilians, but even soldiers knew Germany was hungry. His first meal at Camp Clarinda made Krebs question everything he had been told about the war. Breakfast included real eggs, not powdered. Bacon, actual pork bacon. Bread made from wheat flour, not the potato flour mixture that had become standard in Germany. Real coffee, with real sugar. Butter, not margarine. The portions were enormous by German standards. Prisoners could have seconds. Some meals included fresh milk, something Krebs had not tasted in over a year. There was fresh fruit, oranges, and apples, available regularly. Krebs watched American guards eating the same food from the same kitchen. This was not special treatment to impress prisoners. This was the standard American military diet. The guards were not thin or malnourished. Many were actually overweight by German standards. They discarded food wastefully, throwing away portions that would have fed a German family. The psychological impact was calculated, though American authorities never explicitly stated this. Prisoners who ate better as captives than they had as soldiers could not maintain belief in German victory. If America could feed prisoners this well while fighting a two-front war, what did that say about American industrial capacity? The work assignments provided the fourth revelation. Prisoners were assigned to local farms to address labor shortages caused by American men serving overseas. Hartman was sent to a farm near Shenandoah, Iowa, owned by the Anderson family. The 40-minute truck ride offered views of American agriculture that shocked the German prisoners. Farm after farm, each with substantial houses, large barns, modern equipment, tractors, not horses, plowing fields of corn and wheat, electrical lines running to every farm, automobiles, not military vehicles, but private cars, parked at farmhouses. The farms were enormous by German standards, hundreds of acres each. The Anderson farm operated 5 tractors, 3 trucks, and had electricity throughout the house and barn. The family of 4 lived in a 2-story farmhouse with indoor plumbing, electric lights, a radio, a refrigerator, and a telephone. They owned 1,500 acres. Anderson explained through the guard interpreter that his farm was average for the region, not exceptional. Hartman had grown up in rural Bavaria. His family's farm had been 70 acres, worked primarily by hand and horse. Few German farms had tractors. Most lacked electricity. Indoor plumbing was rare in rural areas. The contrast was devastating. This American farmer, who had never served in the military, lived better than most German officers. His children were healthy, well-fed, and attended school. His wife had appliances that made housework efficient. The farm produced staggering surpluses of grain, meat, and dairy that went to markets and military supplies. And this was during wartime. What would American farms produce in peacetime? The prisoners worked alongside civilian laborers, mostly older men and women. The work was hard, but not brutal. 8-hour days, breaks for meals, safety equipment provided. They received their 80 cents daily in camp scrip. On Sundays, they did not work. The treatment contrasted absolutely with what German propaganda had promised would happen to German prisoners. There were no executions, no torture, no deliberate starvation. The Geneva Convention was followed meticulously, not because Americans were soft, as propaganda claimed, but because America could afford to treat prisoners well, while still prosecuting total war. By August 1943, Camp Clarinda held over 2,000 German prisoners. New arrivals brought news from other fronts. The invasion of Sicily had succeeded. Allied forces were bombing Germany with increasing intensity. The Eastern Front was deteriorating. Prisoners shared information, compared experiences, and began constructing a more accurate picture of the war. Schmidt, the senior German officer, requested permission to organize educational classes. Colonel Harrison agreed, providing materials and space. German prisoners could continue their education, learn English, study American history. Many took advantage. Some learned trades that would serve them after repatriation. The educational opportunities provided another contrast. Germany had mobilized totally for war, eliminating anything not immediately useful to victory. America prosecuted total war while maintaining educational programs for enemy prisoners. The industrial revolutions came gradually but inexorably. Prisoners assigned to railroad maintenance, saw freight trains passing with unprecedented frequency. Flat cars carried Sherman tanks in quantities that seemed impossible. 50 tanks on a single train, multiple trains daily. Hartman did the mathematics. If one train carried 50 tanks and 5 trains passed daily, that was 250 tanks per day on one railroad line. How many railroad lines did America have? Dozens? Hundreds? The production numbers seemed fantastic, yet here was physical evidence. The tanks were real, new, perfectly manufactured, moving east to ports for shipment to Europe. German intelligence had claimed American tank production was 1,500 monthly. These trains suggested the actual number was far higher. Prisoners later learned the truth. At peak production, American factories built over 2,000 tanks monthly, plus hundreds of tank destroyers and self-propelled guns. The German tank industry never exceeded 300 tanks monthly. Prisoners assigned to work near the Omaha Army Depot in Nebraska witnessed even more staggering evidence. The depot stored supplies for the Pacific Theater. Mountains of equipment stretched for acres, tens of thousands of trucks, all identical, all new. Warehouses holding millions of uniforms, boots, helmets, ammunition stored in quantities that defied comprehension. Hundreds of locomotives waiting for shipment, medical supplies, food rations, construction equipment, all in vast abundance. Obergefreiter Paul Richter, who worked at the depot for 6 months, tried to estimate the supplies he saw. He gave up after realizing the depot held more equipment than the entire Wehrmacht possessed. And this was one depot supporting one theater of operations. Schmidt had studied economics before the war. He understood industrial capacity in theoretical terms, but seeing American production physically overwhelmed theory. He began keeping notes, trying to calculate what these observations meant for Germany's strategic position. Every calculation led to the same conclusion: Germany could not win. The mathematics were impossible. The automobile industry provided particularly devastating evidence. Prisoners saw American civilians driving private automobiles despite wartime gasoline rationing. Cities had traffic jams of private vehicles. The United States had converted automobile factories to war production, yet civilian vehicle ownership remained common. Germany had never had mass automobile ownership. Most German families had never owned a car. The Wehrmacht relied heavily on horse-drawn transport, even in 1943. Over half of German logistics used horses, not trucks. American logistics were fully motorized. Every unit had trucks. Every soldier could expect motorized transport. The contrast in mobility explained much about battlefield outcomes. Richter saw military trucks being manufactured at a Ford plant in Detroit, where he was transferred in 1944. The assembly line produced one truck every 90 seconds. The plant operated 3 shifts, producing over 1,000 trucks daily. One factory. America had hundreds of factories. The numbers became meaningless because they were so large. The aircraft industry completed the Industrial Revolution. Prisoners near aircraft plants saw B-17 and B-24 bombers being produced on assembly lines. The heavy bombers, which Luftwaffe propaganda claimed were difficult to build and easy to shoot down, were being mass-produced like automobiles. Douglas Aircraft in Oklahoma produced one C-47 transport every 90 minutes. Boeing in Seattle produced B-17 bombers at similar rates. Peak American aircraft production exceeded 96,000 aircraft annually, more than Germany and Japan combined. German prisoners, who had been Luftwaffe personnel, found this particularly demoralizing. They had been told German aircraft were qualitatively superior, and that Germany's aircraft industry could sustain the air war. Seeing American factories produce fighters and bombers in assembly line quantities shattered those assumptions. Lieutenant Dieter Hoffmann, a former Luftwaffe officer, was assigned to a prisoner of war labor detail near Boeing's plant in Wichita, Kansas. He watched B-29 superfortresses being assembled, aircraft larger and more advanced than anything Germany had produced. The scale of the factory overwhelmed him. Over 30,000 workers, most of them women, assembled bombers with precision that equaled German craftsmanship while maintaining production rates German factories could never achieve. Hoffmann had been trained as an engineer. He understood the technical challenges of aircraft manufacturing. What he witnessed should have been impossible. You could have quality or quantity, but not both. Yet here were aircraft that met rigorous standards being produced in fantastic numbers. The manufacturing techniques were revolutionary. Interchangeable parts meant any component from any supplier fit perfectly. Assembly line techniques broke construction into specialized tasks. Workers became extremely efficient at specific operations. Quality control was systematic, catching defects before they became critical. The result was reliable aircraft produced faster than Germany could shoot them down. The shipbuilding revelations came through newspapers and radio broadcasts. Prisoners were allowed to access. Liberty ships were being built in days, not months. Escort carriers were being mass-produced on assembly lines. The American merchant marine was expanding faster than U-boats could sink ships. German prisoners, who had served on U-boats, found this particularly devastating. They had been told the U-boat campaign was winning the Atlantic battle. The arithmetic showed otherwise. In 1942, U-boats sank over 1,000 Allied ships. American and British shipyards built over 7,000 ships. In 1943, the disparity grew worse. German shipyards could not replace U-boat losses. American shipyards launched multiple cargo vessels daily. The strategic equation was simple and fatal. America could build ships faster than Germany could sink them, while simultaneously building the escort vessels and aircraft that were destroying U-boats at accelerating rates. The psychological impact on German prisoners varied. Some refused to accept the evidence, retreating into denial and continued faith in Nazi propaganda. Others became depressed, realizing their sacrifices had been in service of a doomed cause. A significant number experienced what camp administrators called intellectual awakening. These prisoners began questioning everything they had been taught about the war, about Germany's position, about the Nazi regime itself. Schmidt fell into this third category. His education allowed him to process what he saw analytically. By late 1943, he had concluded Germany would lose the war. The question was not if, but when and at what cost. He began preparing himself mentally for Germany's defeat and what would come after. The treatment of prisoners contributed to psychological transformation. Guards were generally professional, following regulations without brutality. Prisoners received medical care equivalent to American soldiers. Dental treatment was provided. There were recreational facilities, sports equipment, libraries, stocked with books in German and English. Prisoners could write letters home under supervision. They received packages from the Red Cross. Some camps organized theatrical productions, concerts, educational lectures. The contrast with Eastern Front conditions was absolute. Prisoners who had fought in Russia knew what Soviet captivity meant. Death rates in Russian camps exceeded 50%. German treatment of Russian prisoners was similarly brutal, with millions dying from starvation, exposure, and deliberate murder. American treatment of German prisoners followed the Geneva Convention meticulously, not from weakness, but from strength. America could afford to treat prisoners humanely while prosecuting total war, because American industrial capacity was sufficient for both. The news from Europe accelerated psychological change. By June 1944, the invasion of Normandy succeeded. Despite German defensive preparations, prisoners heard radio broadcasts describing Allied advances. Some refused to believe the reports. Others recognized the inevitable. German prisoners assigned to work details saw the physical evidence of American preparation. Railroad yards filled with equipment destined for Europe, military convoys moving troops and supplies to ports, aircraft flying east in formations so large they darkened the sky. Everything pointed to overwhelming Allied material superiority. The German army was outnumbered, outgunned, and outsupplied on all fronts simultaneously. Some prisoners underwent genuine ideological conversion. Exposure to American values, media, and daily life challenged Nazi indoctrination. They read newspapers describing atrocities committed by the Nazi regime, information that had been hidden from German soldiers. They saw Americans of diverse backgrounds working together effectively, contradicting Nazi theories of racial hierarchy. They observed American democracy functioning during wartime, with elections, free press, and civilian control of the military. Some concluded they had been lied to systematically by their government. Others remained loyal to Germany while rejecting Nazism, separating patriotism from ideology. A minority remained committed Nazis, isolated themselves, and refused contact with Americans or cooperative prisoners. Camp administrators identified and separated the hardline Nazis from other prisoners. These unrepentant believers in the Nazi cause were sent to separate facilities where they could not intimidate or harm prisoners who were cooperating or expressing doubts. The separation allowed many prisoners to speak more freely about their observations and doubts. Discussion groups formed where prisoners debated Germany's future. Some wanted restoration of the Kaiser. Others advocated for democracy based on American models. Many simply wanted the war to end so they could return home to rebuild their lives. The final year of the war brought increasing numbers of prisoners to America. By late 1944, over 300,000 German prisoners were held in camps across the United States. Most had been captured in France after D-Day. These prisoners brought first-hand accounts of the overwhelming Allied material advantage. Hartmann met prisoners from his old division, who described the Normandy fighting. Allied artillery fired shells in quantities that seemed unlimited. Allied aircraft attacked constantly. Allied armor advanced in numbers that overwhelmed German defenses. Prisoners described highways filled with Allied vehicles, stretching to the horizon, traffic jams of military equipment moving toward the front. They described Allied soldiers well-equipped, well-fed, confident. They described German units short of ammunition, fuel, food, hope. By early 1945, prisoners received news of Germany's collapse. The Rhine crossings succeeded. Allied forces advanced into Germany from east and west. Cities fell. The Nazi government disintegrated. Hitler's death was announced. Germany surrendered unconditionally in May 1945. For prisoners in America, the war's end brought relief mixed with dread. They were alive, healthy, well-fed. Their families in Germany faced occupation, destruction, starvation. Some prisoners volunteered to remain in America rather than return to the devastation. American authorities began repatriation planning, but the process would take years. Germany lacked the infrastructure to receive and process millions of returning prisoners. Food shortages made feeding returnees difficult. Housing was destroyed. The economy was collapsed. Many prisoners remained in America through 1946, working and earning wages while waiting for repatriation. Some married American women who had been prohibited from contact during the war, but became acquainted afterward. Others learned trades that would help them rebuild in Germany. Schmidt remained at Camp Clarinda until late 1946, running educational programs and helping younger prisoners prepare for return to a Germany they would barely recognize. His notes from captivity would later form the basis for a memoir describing his psychological journey from devoted German soldier to someone who understood that Germany's defeat had been inevitable. From the moment America entered the war, Hartmann returned to Bavaria in March 1947. His family's farm had been damaged, but was repairable. He brought skills learned working on American farms, knowledge of mechanical equipment, and understanding of efficient agricultural methods. More importantly, he brought understanding that Germany's future lay in rebuilding, not in nursing grievances. He had seen American strength firsthand. He knew renewed conflict was impossible. He became an advocate for German-American reconciliation, using his experiences to argue that Germany must choose democracy and integration with the West. His journey from panzer crewman to democratic advocate reflected the larger transformation of Germany in the post-war years. The German prisoner of war experience in America served multiple purposes beyond simply holding captured enemy soldiers. It demonstrated American capacity for humane treatment, even of enemies. It provided labor for American farms and industries, facing worker shortages. It exposed German soldiers to American values and living standards, creating a cohort of Germans who understood American strength and could articulate it upon return. Most significantly, it shattered the Nazi narrative of American weakness that had underpinned German strategy. The prisoners who returned to Germany brought eyewitness accounts of American industrial might that no propaganda could counter. They described factories producing war materials in unimaginable quantities. They described farms producing food surpluses while Germany starved. They described a society that maintained civilian living standards while fighting a global war. They described transportation networks, electrical systems, communications infrastructure, and industrial capacity that dwarfed anything Germany possessed. The post-war analysis revealed the staggering disparity in industrial production. In total war production, from 1940 through 1945, the United States produced over 297,000 aircraft, compared to Germany's 120,000. America built over 88,000 tanks, compared to Germany's 46,000. American shipyards launched over 5,300 major warships, compared to Germany's fewer than 1,000. American factories produced over 400,000 artillery pieces, compared to Germany's 160,000. The ammunition production disparity was even more extreme, with America producing over 41 billion rounds of small arms ammunition, compared to Germany's 10 billion. American industrial production during the war exceeded the combined output of Germany, Japan, and Italy by a factor of more than 2 to 1. German military planning had been based on fundamentally flawed assumptions about American industrial capacity and will to fight. Nazi ideology portrayed Americans as racially inferior, too soft for sustained warfare. Intelligence estimates of American production capacity were wrong by factors of 2 to 5 depending on the category. Strategic planning assumed America would prioritize the Pacific theater, leaving Europe secondary. All these assumptions proved catastrophically wrong. America prosecuted total war on 2 fronts simultaneously, while maintaining civilian living standards far above European norms. American industrial mobilization dwarfed German capabilities, while requiring a smaller percentage of the population in military service due to superior productivity. The German prisoners who witnessed this firsthand became living refutations of Nazi propaganda. They had seen American strength with their own eyes. They had worked alongside Americans. They had eaten American food, used American equipment, observed American efficiency. Many concluded that Germany had never had a realistic chance of victory once America entered the war. The industrial disparity was too great. The resource base was too unequal. The strategic situation, fighting enemies on all fronts while America concentrated power, was unsustainable. Some prisoners expressed relief that America had been the ultimate victor rather than the Soviet Union. They understood from their own army's behavior on the Eastern Front what Soviet occupation would mean. American victory, despite the devastation of Germany, offered hope for eventual recovery and reconciliation. The legacy of the German prisoner of war experience in America influenced post-war German development significantly. Returned prisoners provided first-hand accounts of American democracy, industrial capacity, and values that shaped German understanding of the Cold War alignment choice. When Germany split into East and West, many former prisoners advocated strongly for Western integration. They had seen American strength and relative American benevolence. They understood that German recovery depended on American support through programs like the Marshall Plan. Their voices carried authority because they had been there, had seen America firsthand during wartime, and could testify to what they had witnessed. In the final accounting, the 378,000 German prisoners who passed through American camps between 1943 and 1946 experienced a comprehensive education in American industrial might. They had entered captivity, expecting harsh treatment from an enemy they had been taught to despise. They discovered instead a nation so wealthy and powerful it could treat prisoners well while crushing Germany militarily. They saw production capacity that seemed impossible. They observed living standards that exceeded German pre-war norms, despite America fighting a global conflict. They encountered values of democracy, rule of law, and human dignity that challenged everything Nazi ideology had taught them. For many, captivity in America became a transformative experience that shaped their understanding of the war, their nation's defeat, and the post-war world they would help rebuild. The shock of recognition, the psychological impact of understanding that everything they had been told was wrong, that Germany's defeat had been mathematically certain from the moment America's industrial giant awakened, that their sacrifices had been in service of a doomed cause led by criminals. This shock transformed thousands of German soldiers into advocates for a different Germany. The prisoners who returned home became builders of the democratic Federal Republic of Germany that emerged from the ruins. They brought with them not just skills learned in captivity, but understanding that Germany's future lay in rejecting militarism, embracing democracy, and integrating with the Western Alliance, led by the nation whose industrial might they had witnessed and whose humane treatment they had experienced. In the prisoner of war camps, scattered across America's heartland, the seeds of post-war German democracy had been planted in the minds of soldiers who discovered that defeat by America offered hope, while continued allegiance to Nazism promised only destruction.